Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together. Welcome to our podcast. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan, and I'm going to take you on a tour of a wonderful city, the city of Nuremberg, nestled in the heart of Germany. I believe Nuremberg is an unheralded wonder of Europe. I was there quite recently with another group of travel journalists, and we had an absolutely fascinating time as well as a ball. It is a place that's packed with history. You've 54 different museums that are needed to actually share how and why this place became what it is. It also, you may be surprised to hear, beer lovers' paradise. Nuremberg perhaps has one of the greatest histories of beer making anywhere on the planet Earth. It goes back centuries, way back into the mists of time, and their iconic beer served in places like the beer gardens really are a drinker's paradise. A little more on that later. I went with this wonderful group of journalists, and we were immediately immersed in the wonder of this city. How to get about? Well, I think what is really important about Nuremberg is that you can walk everywhere. And I would recommend, as we did, taking a guided tour. A 2-hour tour costs around €13 or $13. It's not going to break the bank. All you have to do is wear sturdy walking shoes because there's a lot of cobbles. You may also want to take one of their bike tours, and I'm going to share a lot of fascinating information on that because the city does expand, and if you want to take in some of the places that are a little bit beyond walking, then the bikes are for you. Remember, Germany is number one when it comes to eco-travel. They really are very respectful of the environment, and their bike tracks and their whole system around eco-biking is absolutely fabulous and world class. We started our tour and we soon discovered that Nuremberg is a centre for humanism, for science, mechanical invention. Their favourite son, the Renaissance painter Albrecht Dürer, he lived right in the heart of the city and he did some absolutely mind-blowing work. So a little bit about the history of this fascinating place. It started around 1050 because it was on the trade routes that went through Germany, and it was immediately seen as a place of importance for traders. Then something big happened in 1219. Emperor Frederick II gave Nuremberg the status of an imperial free city. This gave it autonomy, but this attracted a lot of jealousy, and people began to covet this very rich and wonderful city. And there were wars, there was bloodshed, and there were some pretty dark days, particularly during those medieval years when you also had the plague. Things lightened up in the Renaissance. You have your likes of Dürer there coming and creating wonderful art. And Nuremberg specialized in mechanical clockwork and astronomical instruments. It really was a world center for this. The Protestant Reformation was adopted by the Nuremberg populace, and then came the 30 Years' War. And that, combined with the plagues, really took its toll. Now, we move on to the industrialization of Nuremberg. In the 19th century, it grew, particularly metalwork and toys. The toy industry is huge in Nuremberg, particularly in tin soldiers, mechanical figures, but it's moved on now, and it's one of the big centers for toys in the world. And the railway network, which is fabulous in Germany, as you all know, which we tried, really helped all of that. Again, a very dark turn happened in the 1930s. Hitler decided to use Nuremberg as the main sort of cultural center for Nazi Germany. He wanted to sort of piggyback on the royal name. He turned that wonderful royal culture of Nuremberg infamous by having those incredible rallies there. And finally, as a sort of a strange twist of fate, the Nazis who had caused such mayhem were tried there in the Nuremberg trials, and many of them were hanged. So the war also had a terrible cost for Nuremberg. It was extensively bombed because of the importance symbolically, and it was also a centre for munitions. But it's come good. And when you visit it now, you'd never know there'd been a war. You'd never known that half the city was wiped out in one afternoon by Allied bombers. Now it's thriving, there are trade fairs, there's cultural events, it's a vibrant city, and the medieval element of it mixes with this fantastic contemporary Germany, which is trying to find peace with its past, and I think is doing really, really well. Anyway, our first taste of the city was when we met our guide. All the guides are highly trained here. They're all certified. We had Mrs. Claudia Radke. She took us on a wonderful experience of history, culture, architecture, and we had a great 2 hours. You can pretty much see the whole city in 2 hours. Things I try to tick off on your tour would be see the Nuremberg Castle, the Kaiserberg. This is a medieval, fabulous courtyards, towers, the city walls. You get great panoramic views of the city. St. Sebulus, this Gothic church, key landmark of Nuremberg, fabulous stained glass windows. St. Lorenz as well, another stunning Gothic church. They just take the eyes out of your head as you walk around. So the old town is really absolutely fabulous, and again, you wouldn't know that half the buildings have been built from scratch. Again, the dark side always rears its head in Nuremberg. If you go to the Hangman's Bridge, the Henkersteg, you'll see the hangman's house. He was a busy guy by all accounts, because you had the witch hunts, where any woman who had a pointed finger to would probably end up with a noose round her neck. There were religious dissenters and actual genuine crooks. So that's a rather dour house to visit with a very bloody history. I loved and preferred Albrecht Dürer's house. Even though it was bombed during the war, it now has this fabulous museum, and I love his work, his drawings of the famous drawing of the hare. You'll see that a lot on posters around this fabulous, vibrant city. Another really interesting thing about Nuremberg is these fountains. There's one which I particularly took my fancy, the marriage merry-go-round. No, I'm not thinking of getting married, but it's this place where betrothed couples would go to. You'll get some touristy things like the Handwerkenhof. This is a sort of a medieval artisan's courtyard that's been reconstructed, and they'll sell you handmade souvenirs if you like that sort of thing. If you're interested in history, go to the Palace of Justice, where the Nazis were put on trial in those famous black and white photos from the time. And then everything revolves around the market square, this huge square in Nuremberg with the stunning Church of Our Lady. And if you're there during Christmas, they have apparently the best Christmas market in Europe. So lots to see, including the toy museum if you're into that. And just be careful. This is an insider's tip that I learned from going there. The city's often booked out for these toy conventions. So just check that everything's okay when you're going, because otherwise you may have to sleep on one of their wonderful benches. And then you have all of the other places like the Nazi rally grounds. I've done a separate podcast on one of the most chilling places I ever went to, which is where Hitler used to take the salute of the guards, these Nazi rallies, the Nuremberg rallies, where up to 200,000 people would gather to salute the Führer. So, lots to see. There's even a zoo if you want that. And make sure as well that your tour can be, your walking tour can be designed to what you really are interested in, whether that's something like art or history or architecture or beer and whiskey as well. They have a really huge culture in these ancient drinks, and they really know how to make them. I've a fact sheet that will accompany this podcast. You can find the fact sheet on our website, thetoptraveldestinations.com. Click on that and you will have clickable links to everything that we talk about today. Let's move on to bike tours, because there is such a wealth of things to see in this very bike-friendly city. It's not like some of the other places I've been to where you get run over as soon as you put your foot on a bike. They respect their bikes. So you've got things like the Old Town Tour, the Pegnitz River Tour, where you follow the scenic river as it winds through Nuremberg. You have some wonderful things like the Bike and Breweries Tour, not to be missed. Just don't overindulge, and you can go out into the countryside and you can discover the architecture. I've listed a whole set of websites where you can go and check out what's available. The Nuremberg Tourist Office website is always a very good resource, I've found, and you'll get up-to-date bike information, bike rentals, bike tours, all sorts of tours in fact. So check that out. So places to stay. Well, Nuremberg, as I say, it's such a big centre for toys. It's a conference centre and it has a whole plethora of hotel accommodation. A couple of places that I went to and friends stayed in that I could recommend are the Hotel Drei Raben. This is sort of a boutique hotel. It is in the heart of Nuremberg's old town, so that is a plus. It's sort of individually designed rooms, modern amenities, very welcoming. I'd recommend that. Details on the fact sheet. The Meridian Grand Hotel is near the main train station. It's got elegant rooms, touch of luxury if you like that. Great for leisure travellers who want to be a bit pampered. But then you can go on to stay in such places like the Novotel Nuremberg City Ville, modern hotel in the city centre, very comfortable rooms, very, very good value. There's a whole list of places in our fact sheet. You will not be stuck for choice, and that's not even including Airbnb. Now, let's get to the serious end of this. Where are you going to drink? Now, there are numerous, as you can well imagine, bars and beer kellers and beer gardens. Fantastic atmosphere. We went to one beer garden when there was a group of young males who went bananas. I'm not sure what they were celebrating. Maybe it was a football match. You've got places in the heart of the old town like the Hausbrauerei Altersdorfhof. You'll get here craft beers served with traditional Franconian cuisine. That particular drinking establishment has the Nuremberg Red Beer, which is definitely worth checking out. That the Nuremberg Red Beer is a must. You have the Bar Füber die Hausbrauerei. This has a variety of house-brewed beers. If I've mangled the pronunciation of that, which I probably have, you will get all the details in our fact sheet. The Tucker is the brewery that offers a huge range of traditional Franconian beers, and they have a lovely beer cellar that features sort of this combination of regional dishes and fantastic regional brews. So fabulous places. Go to the beer gardens and try these different beers. They really are quite incredible, the quality of the beer. They have cloudy beers. They have what's called the Keller beer. This is a cellar beer, traditional style. It's unfiltered, naturally cloudy. I wasn't mad on it, but I'm not really a beer expert, so try that, the Keller beer. You've got the Roche beer. Nuremberg is close to Bamberg, famous for its smoked beer. Now, I've never tried a smoked beer, and it's not necessarily something I'd be running back and ordering a pint of. It's an acquired taste, but try it. Smoked beer. Where else would you get it but in Nuremberg? So you're going to come down with all the different lagers, the Schwarzbier, dark lager, roasted malt character, chocolate coffee flavours, yum, 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 yum. And then the Zergler, local beer, term in Franconia, including Nuremberg for smaller size beers, in smaller glasses. So you can sample like 0.2 of a litre without overindulging. So ask for that, ask for the sample, and you can get little samples and really get a sense of, well, this is for me, or no, I don't like smoked beer. Food. Well, Nuremberg has a sort of a vast array of Bavarian-inspired food. And it's very, very powerful when it comes to some of the meat, the sausages. You get these incredible bratwurst where you have sausages tucked in a bread roll with mustard and sauerkraut, sort of street food, but really good. You've got this Franconian dish, the Schaufel, roasted pork shoulder, slow cooked so it falls to bits. Lovely, beautiful. And then finally, you've got things like the Rotgrütz, a popular dessert in Nuremberg, and it's red berry pudding, mixture of raspberries, red currants and blackberries, sweetened and thickened with starch. Okay, if you're worried about the calories, step aside, but if not, throw on that vanilla sauce and whipped cream. Yum. So you're going to be spoilt for choice when it comes to beer and for drinking. You're going to be spoiled for choice when it comes to just enjoying the liveliness of it's a young city because it's a university city. So you're going to have this vibrancy. And what I loved was these whole number of cultural events that seemed to be on all the time. There were things that were reflecting on the Holocaust. There were things that were reflecting on the darker side of Nuremberg's history, like the Nuremberg rallies. But that's all in the past, and they've seemed to be really, trying to honor that past while looking to the future. I really doff my hat to them. I like the youngness and I like the upfrontness. We went through a very hard time, and we've come through it. A hidden gem, I'd really encourage you to try this. Now, for me, I'm claustrophobic, so it pushed me to my limits. But there is a tour that takes you to the cellars below the city. Now, these aren't just any cellars. These are hundreds of meters of deep, dark alleyways that have started in the 13th century, and they just got deeper and bigger and wider and longer and narrower as they went down. It's the most incredible place. They were originally conceived to store crops and the hops that made beers. The beers were also preserved down there because it could get hot in the summer and the beer would go off. And they even invented ways of making ice. So it was originally there to keep produce for the winter months. But then came the war, and these tunnels were put to a different use. And we got a first-hand view of this, and this was absolutely mesmerizing and a bit frightening, to be quite honest. It's a guided tour with the beer and whiskey tasting included. We tried this fantastic beer and whiskey that's made locally, and then we met our guide, Mr. Selk, a Nuremberg citizen, but a man of color, which is important in this story. You meet him outside just below Dührer's house, and then you go down this almost inconspicuous sort of set of steps, and you go into another world entirely. The Nuremberg cellars, or the Nuremberg Fesselgang, the rock passages, are a complex of underground tunnels and cellars that stretch way below the city. They go to a depth of 52 feet or 16 meters. There's 20 kilometers in length. That's 12.5 miles. And they connect all the parts of Nuremberg's old town. The width of the tunnels, as we discovered to my particular claustrophobic cost, can get very, very narrow. You suddenly enter a room or a chamber, and then you have to go duck down and really go down. And if you get any doubt in your mind, you could actually turn around and run. I managed to control myself. A couple of times it got quite close. And when we were right down to the end, to the depths, our wonderful guide, he told us how these had been during the war. But I'd like you to imagine this. Close your eyes now for a moment if you're not driving, and just imagine. The air raid sirens go off. It's 1944. The Allies have targeted Nuremberg because of its symbolism to Hitler. Also, it was a centre for munitions. You've got 90 seconds. You flee to get underground before the firebombs fall. He recounted how children would just flee from school, or if they were on trips into town for their parents, they'd have to go on their own, 6-year-olds. They'd go into the cellar. There would be an SS officer on the door. And this is where Mr. Selk said he wouldn't have got in because he was black. If you were not of the Aryan race, blonde and blue-eyed, you were left to face your future and the bombs that were falling on top of your head. That's how it was. So, if you did get down, things went much better inside. They could accommodate 7,000 people, but they were all stuck together. So imagine, you're deep underground, your head's bent, you're packed together. There's these little air vents, but the air vents have to have a special cover because if a bomb hits and the blast wave came, if it went down the air vent, it would basically blow you up, the shock wave itself. This was completely terrifying hearing this, and being down there, you could really get a sense of the horror of this happening. I found it to be really mesmerizing. Not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, I understand that, but I really thought it was the most fantastic. It struck me as well a great irony that history and travel can sometimes give us as lessons, because years, 1938, the people of Nuremberg had hung swastikas and had regaled Hitler as the new god, literally. 6 years later, they're hiding in the depths, in the darkness with no light, as their town above them is bombarded and is shaking with the explosions and the firebombs. Did they change their mind about the Führer? Did they have regrets? I can't answer that question, but I just thought it was so extraordinary that in a 6-year span it went from we are the master race to we are cowering in our deep bunkers, and while our city is burnt to the ground. So there you go. I suppose that's the horror of the war experience, which we see around Europe as we listen to this podcast. So what is my verdict on Nuremberg? Well, I'd have to say I found it utterly fascinating. I found this mix of restaurants, beer kellers, beer gardens, a young population, a vibrant, welcoming population, plus this melding with this ancient culture was absolutely wonderful. And you can go from the dark history of Nazism, you can even go out to the Zeppelin field and see where Hitler was regaled, right down to the bunkers where the consequences of him being brought to power were played out. But now they've turned the corner, and Nuremberg is such a welcoming place. There's so much going on. You will never be bored. There are cultural events, there's theatre, there's street theatre, and just walking around is such a delight. The beauty of the city, the gardens, the vistas that open up, there's the water that flows through it. It's a fabulous place. I couldn't recommend it enough. Go to Nuremberg. It's my top travel destination spot, and I think you will have the time of your life.